To you, Chris, always a pleasure speaking to you, and I'm sure you would have been following those events as they unfolded. I'm sure you've watched the replays of what happened. How did we get to that point in a first brief answer?
Good morning, Gareth. It's always great talking to you. Certainly very concerning scenes playing out at the Pan-African Parliament, where we saw MPs clashing on procedural questions apparently around election. But I'd really suggest to you, Gareth, that this indicates to us that there are deep structural issues that face the Pan-African Parliament, which talk to a clash of cultures, most likely, certainly issues around linguistic dynamics that polarize the environment within the Pan-African Parliament, and certainly we could be seeing questions emanating around generational conflicts between certain MPs who are much older and come from a different era of African politics and decorum, and maybe younger MPs who are pursuing a much more dynamic, revolutionary, accountable engagement within the political discourse that we see in the Pan-African Parliament and indeed in Africa. And finally, what this really puts into play is the effectiveness of these continental institutions, the Pan-African Parliament in particular right now, but also the African Union Commission itself and the African Union, around whether these bodies that are supposed to act as a platform for the unity of Africa, for its development, for its progress, are really well positioned to carry out this large mandate.
And that's what I'm going to ask you about, those mandates and the larger umbrella bodies, not larger, but the umbrella bodies that sit around the PAP, that being the African Union, etc. We'll get there in a moment, though, but let's talk about these, it seems, perceived different ideals. Because I'll agree with you, Chris, and I'll say why, because a lot of social media reaction to this, you've got young parliamentarians coming through, and some saying simply having had enough of the old guard, the old way of thinking about Africa, the old colonial way of thinking about Africa. It's time for Africa by Africans. But here's the concern, isn't it? This is exactly what parliaments are meant to do. It's meant to reintroduce new blood. It's meant to take on the ideas of past and mold that and adapt that. But we cannot be at a point, surely, where we come to fisticuffs when we disagree.
Certainly unparliamentary behavior at the Pan-African Parliament. And the idea here is that this body was established as a platform to be an advisory and a panel where debate on issues relating to Africa can emerge from the parliamentarians themselves, in a way allowing we, the citizens of Africa, to find a place to, through our parliamentarians, to express our views and our opinions around these key issues facing Africa. The unfortunate thing is that the Pan-African Parliament, in its phase now, was expected also to have become a legislative body for the African continent, but it has not progressed to that level. In actual fact, many argue that it is in effect a toothless body, which is nothing more than a talk shop, which doesn't provide the kind of sort of authority to parliamentarians to, in effect, introduce the kind of legislation that will lead to the progress in Africa. And finally, I think that the challenges that you refer to, where we see this dynamic playing out, where maybe a more youthful generation of parliamentarians are calling for more radical changes, a departure from past colonial links, and certainly for Africa to move away from its definition as nothing more than divided regional areas, and more importantly, a linguistic population, some Francophone, others Anglophone, maybe Lusophones in the mix, and of course our Arabic speakers up north. And this dynamic, Gareth, I think really defines the challenges that face the Pan-African Parliament in terms of how it must reconfigure itself to deal with these challenges.
Chris Maroleng, I think many people would agree with you. Calls for some time now for fresh blood and fresh thoughts in Africa, and the one way to do that is through the Pan-African Parliament. Insights, and my thanks to Good Governance Africa Executive Director Chris Maroleng.